The sun blazed mercilessly over the Dakota Territory, casting long shadows across the parched earth of the Broken Arrow Ranch. Samuel Crawford wiped the sweat from his weathered brow as he checked the fence line for the third time that morning. At 35, he carried himself with the quiet strength of a man who had learned to find solace in solitude. Though the loneliness in his gray eyes told a different story, it had been 7 years since Elizabeth left. 7 years since she'd chosen the safety of Boston society over the uncertain promise of frontier life with him. The letter still sat in his desk drawer, its edges worn from handling, explaining how her father had arranged a more suitable marriage one that wouldn't force her to abandon civilization for the wilds of the West. Samuel had built the ranch anyway, every fence post and beam a testament to the dreams they'd once shared. He told himself he'd moved on. The empty cabin and the wedding dress still hanging in the spare room suggested otherwise. The sound of hoofbeats broke through his melancholy thoughts. In the distance, a rider approached at a dangerous pace. Swaying precariously in the saddle, as the figure drew closer, Samuel could see it was a young native man, his blood staining his buckskin shirt, his horse frothing at the mouth from exhaustion. The rider collapsed just yards from the house, his mount. Stumbling to a halt, Samuel ran to him, checking for signs of life. The man was breathing, but barely. A bullet wound pierced his shoulder, and fever burned through his body like wildfire. Without hesitation, Samuel carried the stranger into his cabin. He'd learned enough about healing from his late mother to know what needed doing. As he cleaned the wound and applied bandages, the young man's eyes fluttered open, dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to look straight through to Samuel's soul. "Water," the man whispered in accented English. Samuel brought a cup to his lips, watching as the stranger drank deeply. "What happened to you, soldiers?" came the weak reply. They killed my sister's husband. I tried to stop them." The man's voice cracked with pain that went deeper than his physical wounds. Samuel felt a familiar ache in his chest, the recognition of loss that never truly healed. "Rest now. You're safe here." The stranger studied Samuel's face with surprising intensity. "Why help me? Your people and mine. We are not friends." "A man in need is just a man in need," Samuel replied simply, though something about this stranger stirred memories he couldn't quite place. As night fell, Samuel kept vigil. Beside the sickbed, the young man spoke in fevered whispers, sometimes in his native tongue, sometimes in English. He spoke of his sister, of a love lost to the violence between their peoples, of a white woman who had shown him kindness long ago when he was just a boy. "She had hair like sunlight," he murmured, "and eyes the color of prairie grass. She gave me water when I was lost. Told me her name was Elizabeth." Samuel's blood ran cold. Elizabeth. His Elizabeth had been visiting her aunt in Kansas 7 years ago, when he'd first proposed. She'd mentioned helping a lost native boy find his way back to his people, speaking of it as one of her fondest memories. "What is your name?" Samuel asked, his voice barely steady. "Running Wolf," the man replied, "of the Lakota people." The pieces fell into place like a bitter puzzle. Elizabeth had spoken of Running Wolf often in her letters, the boy who had grown into a respected warrior and translator, one of the few who could move between both worlds. She had mentioned him in her final letter. It's the one where she'd chosen her Boston marriage over Samuel's love. But she had also mentioned something else, something that now made Samuel's heart race with desperate hope. She was coming west again. This time as a widow, her Boston husband having died of consumption, while she was coming to make peace with her past, to see the land that had once called to her heart. And she was coming here, to the Dakota Territory, to find Running Wolf and fulfill a promise she'd made years ago. Dawn brought the sound of thunder across the plains. But it wasn't a storm approaching. Hundreds of hoofbeats drummed against the earth as a massive party of Lakota warriors crested the hill. Samuel stepped onto his porch, Running Wolf beside him, still weak but determined to face whatever came. The riders formed a wide circle around the cabin, their painted faces stern and ready for war. At their head rode an older man whose bearing spoke of great authority, Running Wolf's father, the chief. "My son," the chief called out in English, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Are you well?" "I am well, father. This man saved my life." The chief's gaze turned to Samuel, measuring him with eyes that had seen decades of conflict between their peoples. "You have shown honor to my family. What would you ask in return?" Samuel felt the weight of the moment, understanding that his next words could mean the difference between peace and bloodshed. But before he could speak, another sound reached his ears, the distant rumble of a stagecoach. His heart stopped. The stagecoach wasn't due for another week, unless... The vehicle appeared on the horizon, moving fast toward the ranch. Samuel watched in amazement as it drew closer, recognizing the driver as old Pete from town. And there, pressed against the window, was a face he had memorized in dreams and carried in his heart for 7 long years. Elizabeth. The stagecoach pulled to a halt. Just outside the circle of warriors, the door opened and she stepped down, her traveling dress dusty from the road, but her bearing as graceful as Samuel remembered. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her green eyes swept the scene with remarkable composure, even faced with hundreds of armed warriors. But it was Running Wolf she looked at first. "My brother," she said softly, using the Lakota word he had taught her years ago. "Came as soon as I heard you were in danger." Running Wolf stepped forward, his wound forgotten in his joy. "Sister of my heart, you kept your promise." Samuel watched in wonder as Elizabeth embraced the young warrior, their reunion tender and profound. Only then did her eyes find his, and in that moment, 7 years of separation collapsed into nothing. "Samuel," she whispered, his name on her lips like a prayer answered. The chief observed this exchange with growing interest. "She is the one I told you about, Father. The white woman who saved me when I was a child, who promised to return someday. She is the reason I learned to speak the white man's language, why I became a bridge between our peoples." Samuel stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Elizabeth, why are you here?" Her eyes filled with tears she had held back for far too long. "Because I was a fool, Samuel. Because I chose safety over love, duty over dreams. Because my husband is dead, and I'm free to finally follow my heart." She looked around at the assembled warriors, then back at him. "Because I heard that tensions were rising, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing the 2 men who showed me what courage really means." The chief spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "This woman speaks of my son with great affection. And you, Samuel Crawford, have saved his life. Perhaps the spirits have brought us all together for a purpose." "What purpose?" Samuel asked, his eyes never left Elizabeth's face. "Peace," Elizabeth answered, before the chief could speak. "I've spent the last year learning everything I could about the conflicts between our peoples. I've spoken with government officials, with tribal leaders, with anyone who would listen. I believe there's a way forward that doesn't end in bloodshed." Running Wolf nodded slowly. "My sister speaks truth. She has always seen what others cannot, that we are all just people trying to protect those we love." The chief dismounted his horse, a gesture that sent ripples of attention through his warriors. "Samuel Crawford, you have shown my son the same kindness this woman showed him as a child. In our tradition, this creates a bond of brotherhood between us." Samuel felt the weight of the moment, understanding that history was being written in the dust of his ranch yard. "I would be honored to call Running Wolf brother." "Then let us speak of this peace," the chief said. "But first there are matters of the heart to be settled." Elizabeth stepped closer to Samuel, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough to remember the scent of her hair. "Samuel, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I hurt you terribly when I left, but I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." Elizabeth ... Samuel's voice broke on her name. "Let me finish," she said, reaching for his hands. "I thought I was choosing security when I married Charles. But all I chose was a life without joy, without passion, without the man I truly loved. When he died, I realized I'd been given a second chance to stop being afraid and to fight for what really matters." Samuel felt 7 years of carefully constructed walls crumbling around his heart. "I kept your room ready," he admitted quietly. "I told myself I was being foolish, but I couldn't bring myself to change anything." Tears spilled down Elizabeth's Cheeks, I kept your letters. All of them. I read them when Charles wasn't looking, imagining the life we could have had. Running Wolf watched this exchange with a knowing smile, then turned to his father. Perhaps we should give them privacy. Father, but the chief held up a hand. No, my son. Let all witness this moment. Love like this should not be hidden in shadows. Samuel cupped Elizabeth's face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. I never stopped hoping, he whispered. Even when I told myself I had. Then you'll have me? She asked, vulnerability shining in her eyes. Even though I'm no longer the young girl who left you? Even though I come with scars and mistakes? Especially because of them, Samuel replied. We're both different people now, Elizabeth. Older, maybe wiser. Maybe that means we can love each other better this time. The kiss that followed was witnessed by hundreds of Lakota warriors, and when they finally broke apart, the sound that rose from the assembled crowd was not one of disapproval, but of celebration. Love, it seemed, was a language that transcended all boundaries. Over the following days, as negotiations between the tribe and the territorial government began in earnest, Samuel and Elizabeth rediscovered each other. They talked through long prairie nights, sharing the pain and growth of their years apart. She told him about the loneliness of her marriage, how she had used her position in Boston society to advocate for Native rights, preparing for the day she might return to make a difference. He told her about the ranch, about the dreams he had built, board by board, about the nights when he had stood on the porch looking toward the horizon, wondering if she would ever come back to him. Running Wolf, recovering rapidly under Elizabeth's care and Samuel's hospitality, became the bridge between worlds that Elizabeth had envisioned. His fluency in both languages and his understanding of both cultures made him invaluable in the delicate negotiations that followed. You were right, sister, he told Elizabeth one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Peace is possible, but it requires people willing to see beyond the color of skin to the color of the heart. The treaty that emerged from those talks was unlike any other in the territory's history. It established clear boundaries. While creating opportunities for trade and cooperation, it acknowledged past wrongs while building a framework for future understanding. And at its heart was the principle that Elizabeth had always believed in, that all people deserved dignity, respect, and the chance to build a good life for their families. The wedding took place a month later. It's under the wide Montana sky with both cultures represented. Elizabeth wore her grandmother's dress, the one she had been saving for a wedding that would truly matter. Samuel stood beside her in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as Running Wolf performed the ceremony in both English and Lakota. The chief offered the blessing of his people, speaking of the sacred nature of love that bridges differences and creates new possibilities. Old Pete played his fiddle while Lakota drummers provided a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the earth itself as they spoke their vows. Elizabeth's voice was clear and strong. I promise to choose love over fear, always. To build our dreams together, no matter what storms may come. To never again let anything come between us. Samuel's response came from the deepest part of his heart. I promise to be worthy of your love, to protect our life together, and to never stop believing in the power of second chances. I promise to love you not just for who you were, but for who we're becoming together. When they kissed as husband and wife, the cheer that went up could be heard for miles across the prairie. It was a sound of triumph, of love conquering fear, of hope rising like the dawn over the endless western sky. Years later, as they sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their children play with Running Wolf's sons in the yard, Elizabeth would sometimes marvel at the journey that had brought them together. The Broken Arrow Ranch had become a symbol of cooperation between peoples, a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared. Running Wolf had married a teacher from the territorial school, a woman who shared his vision of education as a bridge between cultures. Together, they had established a school that taught children of both peoples, creating a generation that saw cooperation as natural rather than revolutionary. Do you ever regret it? Samuel asked, one evening, watching the sunset paint familiar colors across the sky. leaving your comfortable life in Boston for all this uncertainty?" Elizabeth smiled, her hand finding his with the ease of years together. "The only thing I regret is waiting so long to come home," she said. "This was always where I belonged, Samuel. Here with you, building something beautiful from something broken." The sound of children's laughter drifted across the yard, mixing with the evening songs of meadowlarks and the distant lowing of cattle. It was the sound of a dream fulfilled, of love that had survived separation and emerged stronger for the testing. As the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Samuel reflected on the strange turns that life could take. A wounded man seeking help had become a brother. A lost love had found her way home. And from the seeds of kindness and courage, a new world had grown, one where love truly could conquer fear. Where second chances were not just possible, but transformative. The broken Arrow Ranch still stood as it always had, but it was no longer broken. Like the hearts that had found healing within its boundaries, it had become whole again. Testament to the power of love to mend what seemed irreparably damaged, and under the endless western sky, where the horizon promised infinite possibilities, Samuel and Elizabeth Crawford continued building their dreams together, one day at a time, one act of love at a time, proving that some stories are worth waiting for, and some loves are strong enough to overcome any obstacle that stands in their way. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song, and the sound carried on the wind like a blessing, like a promise that tomorrow would bring new reasons to believe in the enduring power of love, hope, and the courage to begin again.